Hey everyone! Today I want to take you through the core ideas of a book that, and I'm not exaggerating, genuinely changed my life. It's called Feeling Good by Dr. David Burns. For me, reading this was like finally getting the instruction manual for my own brain. So this is my personal journey through the principles of this book, and it all starts with one single, incredibly powerful idea. On the screen, you see the quote, "You feel the way you do right now because of the thoughts you are thinking at this moment." Now, for most of my life, I just didn't believe this. Not really. I thought my feelings were just automatic. They were a reaction to whatever was happening to me. You know, something bad happens, I feel bad. Something good happens, I feel good. Simple. But it also left me feeling totally powerless, like I was just a passenger on this emotional roller coaster. This one idea, right here, was the beginning of a huge shift for me. All right, so here's the roadmap for where we're headed today. This is basically the path of discovery that I followed. We're going to start with that huge foundational principle, how your thoughts literally create your feelings. Then we'll get into building real, unconditional self-worth, and from there, finding freedom from needing everyone else's approval. We'll talk about taking back control of your actions, mastering some really difficult emotions, and finally, how to wrap this all up into the ongoing practice of self-care. Okay, section 1, your thoughts create your feelings. This first part, this was the big one. It was the absolute turning point for me. This is the core concept that everything else we're going to talk about is built on. It's this massive realization that my thoughts, and not the things happening around me, were the ones in the driver's seat of my emotions. So this is what's called the cognitive model. It says, events don't directly cause emotions. Instead, it's our interpretation of an event, our thoughts about it, that creates our feelings. See, there's a middle step. An event happens, but it doesn't have a direct hotline to your heart. In between that event and how you feel, there's a moment of interpretation. It's what you tell yourself about what happened that actually creates the emotion. And let me tell you, when this clicked for me, it was so empowering. It meant I wasn't just a victim of my circumstances anymore. I actually had a say in how I felt, because I could learn to have a say in how I thought. Now, this next quote, this one hit me hard. Every bad feeling you have is the result of your distorted, negative thinking. Whoa. At first, that sounded pretty extreme, right? But what it did was introduce me to one of the most practical tools in the whole book, the idea of cognitive distortions. These are just common, almost automatic ways our minds bend and twist reality, which then leads to all these negative emotions. The problem wasn't reality itself. It was the weird funhouse mirror my mind was using to look at it. So that leads to the obvious question, right? What are these cognitive distortions? Because it's one thing to know that your thoughts are creating your feelings, but it's a whole other level to be able to see exactly how they're doing the dirty work. And here are some of the main culprits. The book lists a bunch, but these were huge for me. You've got all or nothing thinking. That's when things are either perfect or a complete disaster, no in between. Then there's the mental filter, where you can have 100 good things happen, but you pick out that one single negative detail and just dwell on it. Discounting the positive. Oh man, this was a big one for me. You accomplish something and you just tell yourself it was a fluke or it doesn't count. And then there's emotional reasoning. I feel like a failure, so I must be a failure. And of course, the big one, the constant barrage of should statements. I should have done this. I should be better. They just create a mountain of guilt. Learning to spot these in my own head in real time was a total game changer. So this slide shows the very first practical tool I started using to fight back. It's called the triple column technique, and it's so simple but unbelievably effective. Here's how it works. In the first column, you just write down that automatic negative thought. Let's say I make a mistake at work, and my brain instantly goes, "This proves I'm incompetent." Okay, step 2. In the middle column, you identify the distortion. What is that? Well, it's classic all or nothing thinking. Finally, in the third column, you work to write a more balanced, a more rational response. Something like, "This is an opportunity to improve," or "One mistake doesn't define my entire competence." This little exercise was my first step in actually talking back to and rewriting my own internal script. So after practicing this with my day-to-day thoughts, I started to notice a pattern. A lot of my negative thoughts weren't just random static. They were all circling around a much deeper, more fundamental belief about my own value. And that led me straight to the next crucial part of my journey, building unconditional self-worth. This quote was an absolute light bulb moment for me. Self-worth based on accomplishments is a pseudo-esteem, not the genuine thing. I read that and realized my entire sense of self-worth was built on this fragile pseudo-esteem. I felt good about myself only when I achieved something, or when I got praise, or when I succeeded. The second I failed or someone criticized me, my self-esteem would just completely collapse. It was so fragile and it was exhausting trying to constantly prop it up. And this table here illustrates the difference perfectly. On the left, you have that pseudo-esteem. It's like a house of cards, right? It's built on all these external things, achievements, approval, how you look. And a little gust of wind, a little setback can knock the whole thing down. But on the right, you have genuine esteem, and that's like a deeply rooted tree. It's based on unconditional self-acceptance, the idea that you have inherent worth just because you exist, period. It's stable, it's resilient, and my whole journey became about stopping the frantic rebuilding of that card house and instead starting to water and nurture the tree. You know, when you start building that genuine self-worth, that deeply rooted tree, it naturally leads you to the next big breakthrough. It made me totally reevaluate my relationship with criticism and what other people thought of me. Because if my fundamental worth wasn't actually up for debate, why was I so terrified of their opinions? Now check out this quote. This one is really provocative. There's never been a single time in your life when the critical comments of some other person upset you. I mean, how can that possibly be true, right? Well, here's the powerful idea behind it. Criticism only has power over you when some part of you agrees with it. It's your own negative thoughts, triggered by what they said, that actually cause the pain. Someone's words are just sound waves in the air until you grab them, internalize them, and decide they mean something terrible about your worth. So, I had to learn some new tools for this, like the disarming technique, where you actually find some grain of truth in what the other person is saying. It calms them down and opens the door for a real conversation. I started practicing empathy, trying to understand why they might see things that way. And most importantly, I learned to separate criticism of my actions from criticism of my fundamental self-worth. A mistake doesn't make me a bad person. That was a huge, huge shift. My next big aha moment was realizing that my whole approach to motivation and just getting things done was completely backward. I was living in this constant state of procrastination, basically just sitting around waiting for a feeling that was never going to show up on its own.
I started thinking of this as the motivation myth. And you know this feeling, right? You've got a big task, a project, something you need to do, and you tell yourself, I'll get to it when I feel motivated. But then the motivation just never strikes. So you wait, and the waiting makes you feel guilty and kind of useless, which makes you even less motivated. I was trapped in this cycle all the time.
And here it is, the core idea that just shattered that myth for me. Motivation does not come first, action does. It's the complete opposite of what I'd always believed. You don't wait for motivation to act. You act, even in the smallest possible way, and that action itself creates the motivation. Finishing even one tiny step gives you a little boost, a little spark, which makes the next step just a little bit easier. You build your own momentum.
So to actually put this into practice, I needed a new game plan. Number one, I learned to break overwhelming tasks into ridiculously small, almost laughably manageable steps. Number two, I used a daily activity schedule, not to create this rigid, stressful plan, but to actually give myself credit for every little thing I did. Number three, I set realistic goals and then actually rewarded myself for hitting them. And finally, number four, I learned to shift my focus away from the giant, scary final outcome and just focus on the process, the simple act of doing the work itself, one step at a time.
Okay, so at this point, I had tools for my thoughts and tools for my actions. The next step was to apply them to specific, really challenging emotions that used to have so much control over me, particularly anger and that deep, overwhelming sadness. So, with anger, I learned that just like every other feeling, it's created by my cognitions. It's not just some raw, uncontrollable force. For a lot of us, it gets triggered by the perception that something is unfair, or that someone is breaking one of our unspoken rules. Just understanding that allowed me to take a step back and actually look at the thoughts behind my anger. Instead of just blowing up, I could try to use empathy to see the other person's side, and then use assertive communication to express my own needs without just attacking them.
This next distinction was also incredibly important for me. The book makes it crystal clear that sadness is a normal, healthy emotion. It comes from a realistic perception of loss. Depression, on the other hand, involves distorted thinking that grabs onto that sadness and just magnifies it, turning normal pain into unbearable suffering. So the goal was never to get rid of sadness. That's just part of being human. The goal was to stop my distorted thinking from turning healthy sadness into debilitating depression.
And that brings us to the final part of my journey, which, to be honest, is one that's still going on. It's about taking all of these lessons and integrating them into a sustainable, day-to-day practice for taking care of my own mental health. And this isn't just a simple to-do list. It's a whole shift in approach. It means actually prioritizing the basics, like sleep, nutrition, and exercise, as if they're non-negotiable. It meant I had to learn to set boundaries, to protect my own energy, and to actually use relaxation techniques when I felt stressed. But it's also about the good stuff, actively making time for joyful activities and putting real effort into cultivating the relationships that lift me up. It really boils down to treating myself with the same compassion and care that I would offer to a really good friend.
So, after going through this whole journey, I want to leave you with this one question. It's the same question I started asking myself every single day. What's one automatic negative thought that you have that you can just look at a little more closely today? Just one. Because that single act of questioning, that's where this whole incredible process begins. My journey through these principles really was transformative. I went from feeling like a victim of my own moods to feeling like I was an active participant in my own well-being. And you know, the most powerful thing about all this is that these tools, these ideas, they're not some big secret. They're accessible to anyone who's willing to do the work and look inward. If any of this resonated with you and you're interested in going deeper, I honestly can't recommend the book Feeling Good enough. We've gone ahead and put a link to it down in the description. Thanks so much for joining me today.